Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is December 10th, 2023, Sunday, December 10th, 2023. And let's get this first story going, and why don't we visit a haunted place? Not any haunted place. Haunted city halls. This is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, which you can visit at strangerthanfictionstories.com. Haunted city halls. There are many typical places where ghosts are expected to be found, but government offices are not usually one of them. First place, it's Child Ghost Haunt Spanish Town Hall. The story began February 3rd, 2017, when a counselor of the City Hall of Vegas de Genil had to stay late in the building to finish a project. He was alone that evening, and he got up from his desk to put on a coat because according to him it was abnormally cold. Then he went to the bathroom where he began to hear strange sounds from the end of the corridor, as if someone were dragging a box of files. At first he called out the name of the town hall's orderly, thinking it would be him, but he had long since left. For fear that thieves were breaking in, he decided not to turn on the light. Then with his cellular phone he took a picture of the hall. However, the flash did not go off. He didn't see anyone, which made him feel better. When he returned to his office and he looked at the photograph, he could not believe what he saw. In the middle of the corridor appeared what looked like the figure of a little girl. "I entered into a state of panic," explained the councilman, who locked himself in his office and warned his colleagues who shared his office through the WhatsApp group they shared. One of his companions went to pick him up to take him home. The next day, they wanted to minimize the importance of the event, but when discussing it with a worker from the city council, she told them that other colleagues also said they had felt strange phenomena and restlessness due to the inexplicable cold in the plenary room, where they said there were two heaters, which had been inspected by technicians who confirmed they were working perfectly. Although they tried to prevent the story from getting out, they could not stop the photo from going viral in a small town of about 11,000 inhabitants. A counselor decided to ask a Reiki master to perform a clean energy session to eliminate that strange presence. The Reiki practitioner clarified that it was not an exercise in spiritualism and that their work consisted in opening a door so that these presences that are trapped and do not know how to return are able to do so. According to the Reiki practitioner, besides the girl that appears in the image, there was a denser entity that is the one that caused people that sensation of fear they were feeling. Leandro Martin, the mayor, dismissed the request for an exorcism. He said he had townspeople without electricity, which demanded his attention more than what he suspected was a joke. Nothing more was written about the photograph, or if there was any history to the building which would explain the ghost of a child in a government office. The next location is the old Santa Monica City Hall. In 1912, the City Hall at Santa Monica boasted its own ghost. The building was undergoing improvements, and some hoped it would scare the phantom away. The wraith remained unseen but not unheard. Former Chief of Police Barreto would hear mysterious footfalls and rapping in the treasurer's office. He would go to investigate and would find no one there. George Willie, a one-time police sergeant, used to hear footsteps on the second floor when he was on night duty on the first floor. He would hurry upstairs and went through the various offices, but they were empty. Other officers said they heard uncanny noises. They were unable to explain them. There it goes further to find out if the ghostly presence went to the new building. Now, this is the old Oakland Park City Hall. The Oakland Park City Hall faced demolition in 1913, and there was concern if the old City Hall ghost would be left homeless. Some wondered if he was the spirit of a former prisoner. He was described as a weird figure by several policemen and others who worked at the building throughout the years. It seems he was a quiet ghost, and the police were quite used to him. No one knows who he was or what he was, and only saw him a few times. He presented as a shadowy outline of a stout-built man wearing a cap. He was usually seen around midnight wandering about the first floor. He would go from the old press room toward the coal bunker and finally disappear into a wall. Lieutenant William Wood saw the figure, and after he shouted at it, the figure slid away into the darkness. A.J. Stolk, an electrician, described it as, quote, It had a sort of phosphorescent glow about it. I did not try to talk to it. I beat it at once. You don't catch me mixing up with ghosts because, while I may not be brave, I have good common sense. End quote. Good idea. The next location is the old Greensboro City Hall. It seems that the destruction of old city halls brought about concern for what was to become of resident spirits. Such was the case in 1928 for the phantom that walked the hallway of the Greensboro, North Carolina City Hall. The story of the ghost went back to 1897 when a gallows stood where the crumbling City Hall would be built a few years later at Elm and Gaston. A public hanging took place, and many had come to witness the event. The prisoner was a man convicted of murdering his wife, and he was duly executed. The ghost would prowl on the stairways and about corridors during the night, and policemen who were headquartered on the second floor were the ones to most often hear him bumping and thumping around in the dead hours of night. If there was anyone who would be cursed to walk as a ghost, it would be Robert Sunley Ryan, also known as Sonny Ryan. He was executed on December 29, 1897. He was illegitimate, and from a young age he arrayed himself against laws and morals. He was fond of bad company, carousing, drinking, and gambling. In 1875 he married Eliza A. Jennings, and they had 8 children. He took to making blockade whiskey, and due to his cunning he managed to escape punishment. In the spring of 1897 he beat his wife while she was pregnant, and he left the city in fear of being arrested. He returned in the fall but kept hidden. On December 4th, he waited in the darkness by the gate leading to the house where his family lived on South Ash Street, near the AME church. He knew his wife would visit the market every Saturday to purchase food for the boarders at the house. He disguised himself as a woman and crouched in the shadows. As expected, his wife was returning from her errand with her 5-year-old son. The murder was described by a local newspaper thus, quote, "He stepped toward her, threw his left arm around her neck, and fired 2 shots at her from a .38 caliber revolver, one of the bullets penetrating a vital spot in her left breast, just below her neck. The boy ran back to the house crying that his father was out there trying to kill his mama. William Mitchell, a boarder, ran out, followed by Ryan's oldest daughter, Eva, aged about 18. Mr. J. R. Pitts and others, who happened to be passing almost on the opposite side of the street, rushed over to the scene and found the woman lying on the wet ground. Carrying her into the house, they at once summoned medical aid, but to no avail." End quote. It was thought prudent to execute him quickly after he pled guilty and was convicted, since a large crowd gathered and there was talk of taking Ryan from the jail and lynching him, but Sheriff Hoskins made arrangements to protect Ryan from any mob violence. 80 or more spectators gathered for the execution. He never expressed any remorse. He never asked to see any of his children. The sheriff fixed the rope on his neck and asked if he wanted to give the word when to spring the trap. Ryan said he did. "Tell me when you are ready," said the sheriff. "Let her go," promptly responded Ryan. The fall broke his neck, and 12 minutes later he was pronounced dead. He was 41 years old. Since 1870, there had been 5 executions in the county prior to this one. Eliza's children lived into old age. So yeah, that guy sounds like a good candidate for a ghost, I'll tell you that much. Alright, let's go back to another story. This is out of Ancient Origins, and it's titled "Human Bones Were Ground into Flour to Make Bread in the 16th Century." In human history, there are some tales so bizarre they surpass the wildest fiction. One such story, rooted in the grim realities of 16th century France, reveals a desperate and macabre solution to famine: the grinding of human bones into flour for bread making. The background to this strange episode is set during the tumultuous War of Religion in France in 1590. The city of Paris, controlled by the Catholic League, found itself under siege by the French Royal Army, led by Henry of Navarre, later Henry IV of France. The siege aimed to starve the city into submission, a tactic that led to desperate measures. In these dire times, Pierre de l'Estoile, a clerk-in-chief of the French Parliament, recorded a chilling decision made by Parisians. As food supplies dwindled, an assembly proposed a horrifying solution: to grind the bones from the cemetery of the Innocents charnel house into flour and bake bread from it. Driven by extreme hunger, the plan was executed, but with tragic outcomes. L'Estoile notes that those who ate the bone bread met their death not from starvation, but from the very solution they had hoped would save them. Why did those who ate the bone bread die? This question has puzzled historians and scientists alike. Some speculate that toxic substance like arsenic or psychological trauma from consuming human remains contributed to the deaths. However, a more likely explanation lies in the nutritional inadequacy and inorganic nature of human bones. Human bones are rich in minerals, like calcium, but lack essential nutrients and calories. Consuming bones as a primary food source could lead to severe digestive issues, including intestinal blockage, which in the context of an already weakened populace proved fatal. Interestingly, by the early 19th century, the understanding of bones' mineral richness shifted its use. Following the Napoleonic Wars, the bones of fallen soldiers and horses from the Battle of Waterloo were collected, ground up, and used as fertilizer, not food, in recognition of their rich mineral content. While the tragic tale of Paris's bone bread remains a dark chapter, a peculiar legacy continues in England. In Gloucestershire, a type of bread known as bone bread emerged, named not for its ingredients but for the boneyard scavengers along the River Severn in the 1860s. This bread thankfully contains no human remains, marking a stark contrast to the desperate measures of 16th century Parisians. So there you go. Okay, back to Stranger Than Fiction stories. And this one is titled A Nod to the Left-Hand Path. Sister Margaret Ann Paul was stabbed to death on April 5th, 1980, Holy Saturday and the day before her 72nd birthday. There was nothing random about the identity of this victim, or when she was killed. In 1968, Sister Annunciata became Sister Margaret Ann Paul. Only 2 years before the Sisters of Mercy had allowed the nuns to use their baptismal names, she had taken the habit over 50 years before. In 1980, she lived on the top floor of Mercy Hospital in Toledo, Ohio, which served as a convent for 17 nuns. The discovery of her body in the sacristy of St. Joseph's Chapel in the hospital shocked employees. Police speculated she was murdered early that morning while preparing for Holy Saturday services. The coroner later determined she had been stabbed as much as 32 times, strangled, and sexually molested. Her dark blue habit was pulled up to her chest, and her girdle and underwear had been pulled down to her ankles. The police questioned witnesses and searched for physical evidence, but a year later there had been no arrests. The employees took up a collection for money, and the county government offered another $10,000 in reward for information. The $24,000 incentive did not produce any viable clues, much less a suspect. 24 years would pass before police caught a culprit, and it was the unlikeliest of persons, or so it seemed. In 2003, the case was reopened after a tip was called into the Lucas County Prosecutor's Office. Now there was new technology known as blood transfer patterns. This brought investigators to re-interview Reverend Gerald Robinson, 66, who during the initial investigation was considered one of several suspects. Ironically, Robinson had performed a funeral for Sister Paul. Father Robinson and Sister Margaret Paul worked together since he was one of 2 chaplains for the hospital. The lead that caused the case to be reopened came in the form of a woman alleging that Reverend Robinson had sexually abused her during bizarre rituals. To be exact, she described them as satanic and sadomasochistic ceremonies which were attended by several priests. New information about the murder scene was publicized in 2004. Sister Paul's body was surrounded by candles with her arms extended unnaturally at her sides, and an altar cloth was draped over her body. She was posed to look as though she had been sexually assaulted, but police found no evidence of sexual activity. Investigators accurately described the crime as a ritualistic killing. Authorities admitted they had never suspected robbery as a motive, since Sister Margaret's purse and several gold crucifixes near her body were not taken. No fingerprints or footprints were found, and it was believed the killer used a small knife. Father Robinson's office was steps away from the chapel, which was tucked away in the hospital. He was one of several suspects the police were hoping to find solid evidence on, at the beginning of the investigation. An employee interviewed at the time of the murder, who worked in the emergency room, said, "It was somebody who would have had to know what Sister's habits were. It had to be somebody who knew the territory and knew the routine. That leaves you with very few people." She described Father Robinson as quiet and aloof. Not too long after the murder, Robinson was appointed pastor of 3 parishes in Toledo in 1981, and he left the hospital. In 1989, he moved to a church in suburban Toledo, and 5 years later became chaplain at Flower Hospital and Lake Park Nursing Home. On June 11, 2003, the woman whose allegations reopened the case testified before the Diocesan Review Board and wrote a detailed statement alleging years of abuse by Toledo priests during her childhood. Now she was in her 40s and described satanic ceremonies in which she was placed in a coffin filled with cockroaches and forced her to swallow what she believed was a human eyeball. She was penetrated with a dead snake, which had been decapitated to consecrate these orifices to Satan. She alleged the clerics killed an infant, a 3-year-old child, performed an abortion on her, and mutilated dogs during the ritual. She also accused another priest named Chet Warren. By 2003 and 2004, Warren's whereabouts were unknown, and he had been banned from ministry. Allegations against him for ritualistic abuse surfaced in the mid to late 1980s. One of his victims said he had abused her for 4 years starting in 1969 when she was 13 years old. The accuser of both priests, Chet Warren and Gerald Robinson, was a Catholic nun. She was one of several who came forward to describe abuse at the hands of these men, and others under similar circumstances. By then, about a dozen persons were being represented by attorney Catherine Houlihan. She said the victims, both men and women, could not recall how many priests abused them, but this was not surprising since they were children and scared. Father Robinson was described by parishioners in the blue-collar Polish neighborhood where he worked as shy and dedicated. He spoke fluent Polish and was popular in the area. At the time of his arrest in 2004, he was performing pastoral care at nursing homes and hospitals in Toledo. The Diocese of Toledo decided against paying Robinson's legal bills and suspended him. The members of St. Anthony's Church took a collection for his defense fund. Described as being a generous man, Robinson's former secretary at St. Anthony said, "Sometimes I thought he was too generous." Louis Schlesinger, a forensic psychology professor, said, "Ritualistic behavior in murder is almost always associated with sexually motivated murder, where the ritualistic conduct is carried out because the murder itself would not satisfy the person psychosexually." He explained it was common for a sexual offender to kill one victim but not another. In the days after the murder, police had taken a letter opener with a unique medallion from Robinson's room. There was also a stained linen found outside the hospital chapel, which was believed to be a key piece of evidence. Dave Davison investigated Sister Paul's murder in 1980. He was eating breakfast with another officer in Mercy Hospital's cafeteria. Suddenly a nurse yelled, "There's a dead nun." When they arrived at the chapel, there were 3 doctors, 8 nurses, and several nuns trying to revive the dead woman. Davison began talking to them, but about who could have committed the crime, and he heard the same answer repeatedly: Father Robinson or the priest. In May 2004, when he was retired, he said, "This is no secret. From day one, they said he did it." He believed that high-ranking Catholic police bosses didn't allow an aggressive investigation of the case. On May 4, 2004, Robinson walked out of jail on a $200,000 bond, which was paid by his supporters. Several days later, he pleaded innocent to an aggravated murder charge. If convicted, he faced life in prison, and not the death penalty since it was not in effect in Ohio at the time of the killing. In mid-July, Sister Paul's body was exhumed for a new forensic examination. The coroner who had examined the corpse originally had died. Sister Paul was buried next to a large statue of Jesus at Bernardine Cemetery, which is the final resting place for all the Sisters of Mercy who lived in the Midwest. Robinson did not go to trial until February 2005. By then, police searched an abandoned house in Lucas County, where people were reportedly taken as part of abuse ceremonies. They were looking for evidence of cult gatherings in church attics and basements. They interviewed experts on subversive groups and church history. They also spoke to a founder of a secret fraternity whose members dressed in nuns' clothing. During the trial, it came out that Robinson had failed one of two lie detector tests in the days after the murder. The failed test indicated he was involved in Sister Paul's murder. A second test given a few months later showed he was telling the truth. In February 2006, it came out that shortly after the murder, Robinson had told police that someone had come forward and confessed to killing the nun. He later told investigators he lied about that confession because he wanted to deflect the detective's accusatory tone during an interrogation. During the hearing, an investigator testified that an altar cloth found near the body had blood transfer patterns that matched those from a sword-shaped letter opener police found in Robinson's office in 1980. Robinson had told police he had exclusive control of the knife. During the trial, the prosecutor said the blade found in the priest's room fit the nun's wounds, like a key in a lock. The medallion on the letter opener was the size of a dime and had an image of the U.S. Capitol on one side. Robinson had lied about having a key to the chapel sacristy where the body was discovered. Two nuns, who had been the first to discover Sister Paul, testified at the trial. Sister Madeline Marie Gordon, the chapel organist who first found the body, said she first thought the body was a mannequin used to teach resuscitation because of its strange position, which later she realized was posed unnaturally. The other nun, Sister Phyllis Ann Gerold, said she remembered the nun's face was swollen and there was no blood. She also testified the victim's genital area was exposed. The nun said that Sister Paul's 2-inch cross pin and watch, as well as a pair of scissors, were missing. They described Sister Paul as strict but devoted and giving. A coroner testified that the letter opener, when inserted into a wound on the nun's jaw, was a perfect fit. She also confirmed that of 31 stab wounds to the face, neck, and chest, 9 were in the shape of an upside-down cross. Investigators testified that the letter opener, when taken from Robinson's desk, didn't have any fingerprints, stains, or smudges. One said it was sumptuously clean. It appeared that it had been polished. That was interesting. A housekeeper testified that the day before her death, Sister Paul was upset about changes being made to the Easter weekend services. The nun had told her, "Why do they cheat God out of what belongs to him?" She didn't specify which of the two chaplains she was upset at. A maintenance man who was cleaning floors the morning Sister Paul was killed testified he heard fast-moving footsteps in a hallway above. This hallway led to Robinson's living quarters in the hospital. He said it was odd because most of the building was empty. He thought the footsteps stopped short of Robinson's room. The prosecutors brought experts on Roman Catholic law and the occult. Father Grob testified that an upside-down cross is used in satanic worship. He said that only a priest, nun, or seminary student would understand the significance of the inverted cross and other aspects of the crime scene, including a small streak of blood on the nun's forehead that could have been made by someone forming the sign of the cross on her head. He said, quote, "You're taking a person who's devoted to God and in every aspect, it's a mockery. These aren't random acts." End quote. The altar cloth placed over her chest before she was stabbed could be viewed as a symbol of sacrifice. Dr. Don Perlmutter, who ran a private organization that provided specialized crime scene identification and criminal investigation assistance to police departments around the world, assisted the prosecution. She had been working in this field for 15 years and had assisted in the murder of Sister Mary Laura Manetti in 2000 in Italy. In an interview, Dr. Perlmutter said that regarding the murder of Sister Paul, it was about as classic as it gets for a satanic ritual. She pointed out the site of the crime indicated a satanic ceremony. Desecration of sacred space enhanced the magical power of the ritual. This setting was ritually required for traditional Satanists. The timing on Holy Saturday intensified the defilement. Sacred holidays hold special significance for the true believers. The victim, being a dedicated servant of God, would be considered a great accomplishment for the perpetrator. The sacred objects surrounding the murder scene also reinforced the murder as being ritualistic. This was evident with the arrangement of the candles and the use of the altar cloth. Dr. Perlmutter theorized the murderer stabbed the nun so many times not in anger, but to draw more blood from her body to complete the ritual. Since he had strangled her to the verge of death, her heart was not circulating much blood through her body. There was a circular bruise in her chest area, which she believed was made when the perpetrator pressed the lips of a chalice to the wound to fill it with blood. The inverted cross on Sister Paul's body is very common in satanic crimes, Dr. Perlmutter explained. The stab wounds were all on the left side of the body, which was another nod to the left-hand path. Despite prior reports that Sister Paul had not been raped, the coroner found she had been penetrated by an unspecified instrument. Dr. Perlmutter explained this was not done for sexual gratification, but as part of the ritual. She believed the instrument used to desecrate the sister's body was probably a cross. She also explained that in all her years of investigating ritual violence, perpetrators never get rid of knives they had used in a ritual, which explained why Father Robinson held on to the letter opener. It was inscribed with 2 pentagrams on one side of the handle. The jurors were shown a 90-minute video of Robinson's interview with police after he was arrested in 2004. He said he woke up and had finished showering when he received a phone call about Sister Paul's death and that he was nowhere near the crime scene. He told the investigator that the other chaplain, Reverend Jerome Swetecki, had accused him of committing the crime. He said he was stunned when he arrived at the sacristy and Swetecki said, "Why did you do this?" He said he couldn't understand why the other priest would accuse him. 3 hospital employees testified they saw Robinson just outside the building's chapel within an hour before her body was found inside. One said he saw Father Robinson coming out of the chapel doors with a dark duffel bag in his hands. Another witness was Dr. Jack Barron, who said he ran towards the chapel when he heard an emergency call over the speaker. He mistakenly ran past the chapel and saw another man walking towards it wearing black garments and a priest's collar. The man in the hallway looked over his shoulder at him, and he described it as, "He gave me a stare that went right through me." When he turned around and ran back to the chapel, the priest was no longer around. Former police detective Arthur Marks testified that whoever killed Sister Paul was not a stranger because there were so many stab wounds. It was someone very angry, he said. The reports he had made of his interviews of Robinson and the other chaplain had gone missing but were later found. The prosecution said that the murder of Sister Paul was sparked by Robinson's anger over her domineering ways. On May 11, 2006, Robinson was convicted of murdering Sister Paul. He was immediately sentenced to the mandatory term of 15 years to life in prison and was taken away in handcuffs. During the search of Robinson's room in 2004, police found several hundred photos of caskets and corpses, along with a pamphlet about the occult that was written by a Catholic organization. The defense attorney said Father Robinson collected these items because it was an old Polish custom. In the aftermath of the trial, church and former police officials were accused of attempting to thwart the investigation in 1980 because of who the suspect was. Some believe there was a cozy relationship between police and the Toledo Catholic Diocese hierarchy. A retired detective testified that his interview with Robinson in 1980 ended abruptly when the deputy chief at that time and a priest from the diocese stopped the interrogation being conducted on April 19th. The priest in question was Monsignor Jerome Schmidt, a cigar-smoking cleric who was ordained in 1941. By 1980, he had become one of Toledo's most powerful church leaders. After this intervention, the investigation went nowhere. The church's influence in Toledo extended back to the 1950s. Gene Fodor, who served on the Toledo police force from 1960 to 1987, said officers wouldn't dare arrest a priest because they would have been fired. He described when in 1960 parishioners in a working-class neighborhood complained to him about Father Alexander Pinter because they believed he was molesting altar boys at a lakefront cottage. They were outraged the police were not doing anything about it, but he couldn't tell them that he wasn't permitted to do anything about it. Finally, Fodor's superiors spoke with Bishop George Rehring and told him either he did something about Father Pinter or they would. In July 1960, the priest, then 41, entered a treatment center in Canada. His departure from Ohio had been quiet and quick. Later, he taught in seminaries in the United States and served in 2 parishes in the Diocese of Oakland. By the 1970s, he was working in Louisiana, and he died before the decade was out. He was never held responsible for his crimes. Prosecutors said that when Sister Paul was killed, witnesses were reluctant to implicate a priest. However, after the scandal of child sex abuse at the hands of priests rocked the Catholic Church, this reticence had changed. In September 2006, 4 months after Father Robinson's conviction, the crime was still causing controversy in the parish where he served. A church bulletin announced a chicken dinner fundraiser for him. However, this caused a protest from some parishioners. An email was sent to the bishop, who said the item was inappropriate, and his office said they had not granted permission for the ad to be placed. Even though it was not sanctioned, more than 100 people donated a minimum of $15 for the dinner. The money was to help pay for Robinson's appeal. In January 2007, the civil lawsuit against Robinson was dismissed. The woman who accused him of taking part in ritual abuse ceremonies 40 years before was told the statute of limitation had expired. In 2011, the Ohio Supreme Court declined to hear the case. In 2008, an appeal court upheld Robinson's conviction, and in 2009, the Supreme Court declined to hear Robinson's appeal. In 2011, attorneys representing Robinson claimed that a deceased serial killer could have been the one who stabbed and strangled her. They were speaking of Coral Eugene Watts, who died in a Michigan prison in 2007. He lived less than an hour away from Toledo and fit the description of witnesses who said they saw a young, thin black man at the hospital. One of Robinson's original defense attorneys said that he had not considered Watts because he was known to stalk and kill young women when they were outside. Watts was a suspect in more than 25 slayings and may have killed more than 80 women. He had confessed to 12 killings, 11 in Texas and 1 in Michigan. A former Toledo police detective testified that Watts once told another investigator he never killed anyone in Toledo. That same year of 2011, a 136-page police report dating back to 1980 was discovered. However, in 2012, a judge ruled that the reports didn't contain any new information that would have changed the outcome. Robinson died July 4, 2014, and many parishioners in the Diocese of Toledo were shocked to learn that his body was buried with full priestly rites. Within weeks of Robinson's burial, a site devoted to selling memorabilia from notorious killers was selling dirt said to be from Robinson's gravesite. The sale also included a photo of Robinson in his coffin. And there you go. Yep. Here's Reverend Robinson when he was young, and this is 2004. Interesting, huh? Now, our next story is out of Cult of Weird, and it's titled SEELY'S Castle and the Satanic Mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. Here we go. Wait, where are we going? Wait. The fascinating history of SEELY'S Castle, also known as the Overlook Mansion, is overshadowed by rumors of satanic rituals and human sacrifices by a rich elite and powerful Satanists of Asheville, North Carolina. I have personally done many years of hands-on research, often dangerous, in and around the city of Asheville, North Carolina. Pamela Schufert wrote, Asheville is known as a Satanist/pagan mecca of the East Coast. Nestled in the mysterious Blue Ridge Mountains, as I descend from Virginia, such remote mountains and valleys have long been the desired sites for bizarre and often violent cult rituals, many culminating in human sacrifice. End quote. This may read a bit like the introduction to a Lovecraft story, but Schufert presents it as fact in a 2001 report, Satanism in America Today, which seems to have been originally posted in installments to conspiracy-themed Yahoo groups and a website hosted on the free 50 megs platform called American Holocaust. She details rumors of rampant satanic activity throughout Asheville society, from high school students sacrificing animals to the city's wealthiest and most influential residents sacrificing their own infants to earn their Dark Lord's favor. Every year across America, up to 1 million innocent victims are abducted or bred for human sacrifice by Satanist cults, Schufert explains. They die in agony, their screams unheard by mainstream America. Their remains will never be discovered. They were tortured, cannibalized, cremated, and disposed of. Schufert describes herself as a Christian woman with apparent ties to this group through her father. She relates harrowing encounters with them while spiritually protecting other Christians under attack by these shadowy individuals. It is a narrative that sounds exactly the same as numerous other Christian writings of the last several decades. The infusion of the Christian perspective tends to get tedious, but I love a good story about the world's most powerful people conjuring Satan for demonic blood orgies. I was raised on, or trau- I was raised on, or traumatized by heavy doses of Christian paranoia and satanic panic in the 1980s and 90s. As a child, I attended eerily cult-like small-town churches who preached fire and brimstone, end-time teachings about how the government was run by Satan. We would be forced to take the mark of the beast or face certain death. And I swear this true, the song Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Cyrus, a staple of popular country radio at the time, was a demonic portal that would damn your soul to an eternity in hell just by listening to it. My mother once even took me to a highly attended conference where Christian fundamentalist Tex Mars presented, often with photographs, all the horrible things he alleged Satanists were doing to innocent people to spite God. Christian gore porn. They love all the gruesome details. After years of nightmares and the onset of a crippling lifelong anxiety, I eventually came to find a certain comfort in the absurdity of dark caricature of evil presented in these claims. Some of it might be real, some less so. I mean, does the Illuminati really carry out human sacrifices in the catacombs of the Vatican? Do the cremation of care ceremonies at Bohemian Grove really mean demons that have infiltrated the upper echelons of world government? Are lizard people actually pulling the strings to manipulate world affairs? Probably not, though that would surely make things more interesting. Conspiracy theories. I stumbled upon Schufert's report in the early 2000s, a time when a video called Loose Change was convincingly spinning the narrative that 9/11 was an inside job. Alex Jones had smuggled a video camera into Bohemian Grove to expose our country's leaders as giant stone owl-worshipping weirdos, and chemtrails were definitely controlling our weather. Or our minds, or both. This was long before QAnon, Flat Earth, and the COVID scamdemic. Even before the thousands of guillotines were being stored at U.S. military bases to eradicate Christians. You know, the good old days, when the world was just being controlled by Illuminati Satanists, who assassinated JFK to cover up UFOs and bring about the Antichrist and the New World Order. I found Schufert's work on a website called Educate Yourself, which somehow still exists and touts the dangers of FEMA concentration camps, vaccines, Wi-Fi, and cell towers while promoting the health benefits of colloidal silver and bioelectrification. Satanism in America Today is published on the site as a 7-part expose of alleged satanic activity in the Asheville area, where the mountains supposedly conceal great caverns of evil that Schufert claims she even clashed with during her decades of research. I've narrowly escaped several abduction attempts in those mountains, Schufert wrote, and I was told by my father's former high priest that they had succeeded in their attempt. I would have been seized and hauled down in chains in a Ryder rental truck and then chained to the altar in their great Satanist caverns of the Smokies, which stretch far into Tennessee, and most brutally sacrificed for having dared to stand against them. Yes, apparently Satanists rent moving trucks to haul their sacrificial victims to their evil mountain lairs. Ryder and other rental trucks are frequently used to secretly haul human sacrifice victims to sacrifice locations nationwide, Schufert explained. Next time you see a U-Haul in the neighbor's driveway, ask yourself, are they moving, or is it just another human sacrifice? The Satanists in the mountains of North Carolina are never shy about announcing their presence, Schufert wrote. In fact, they have often let it be known that they are quite proud of their exploits. But then, why not? The jewel of Asheville, North Carolina is the famed Biltmore Estate, former home of the great Illuminati Satanist millionaire George Vanderbilt. In his Illuminati mansion, one large room contains a Coven's table with 13 seats on either side. On the door is a plaque with the words, Assemblage of the Gods. I've never been to Asheville, but it sounds great. Schufert should have been put in charge of the tourism department. Asheville, it seems, will be the epicenter of the Luciferian NWO. At some point, martial law will be declared and our corrupt government will round up Christians and patriot resistors into boxcars fitted with ramshackles which Schufert claims already exist, were even brought out for Halloween one year and transported them to death camps throughout North Carolina. In one case, Schufert says a young woman, a Christian and a virgin, of course, had been targeted for sacrifice by the Asheville Satanists, so Schufert was asked to help. In 1992, I was investigating Satanism in the mountains of North Carolina. I was tipped off by a satanic crime investigator about a young woman whose life was living hell. She was marked for abduction and sacrifice by local Satanists, and they were systematically destroying her life. Her social life was cut off. Most of her previous friends had been slowly frightened away. Even pastors had been frightened to stand with her, apparently. The investigator suggested I could provide spiritual comfort and support for her if I moved into her trailer with her. The attacks began months prior when the girl's mother received a phone call. "We're going to get your daughter for sacrifice," a voice said, and hung up. Knowing that victims fall more easily into Satanist traps if terrorized prior to abduction, fear creates confusion and tend to paralyze, Schufert wrote. They started off their conquest of Cindy with these words. Schufert writes that this was followed by roadside abduction traps, poisoning, stalking, Satanists cutting off electricity and phone service at the girl's home, and even tapping her phone so that they could interrupt conversions by shouting, "Kill." Of course, it only got worse once Pam got involved. "The Satanists worked double time after I moved in," she wrote. Sensing that my friend was now receiving the needed Christian support and teachings in order to evade them, they became more violent and insane in their efforts. We endured many episodes of life on the wild side. I found myself spending countless hours on my knees in prayers for our protection, having both a Bible for support and carrying a loaded handgun in a belt bag, 24 hours a day for emergencies. So the Satanists brought in the big guns, so to speak, a curse pin. In the months that followed, she endured many attacks, Schufert wrote, including suffering a curse pin that was secretly planted in a car seat she sat in unsuspectingly one morning on the way to church. Satanists often use curse pins, fine pins planted in locations wherein the unsuspecting victim may encounter them. They are coated with deadly poisons and assign demons of destruction to the victim as well. After she sat in this car seat, the fine pin slowly worked itself into her leg, which was in contact with the seat. The pain was tremendous. She screamed as the burning spread through her leg and her body. Her friend pulled the car over to the side of the road and then rushed her off to the fire station. Cindy was taken to the Memorial Mission Hospital in Asheville, where Schufert says she was initially refused treatment when the emergency room staff learned she was suffering from a satanic attack. As a former high-level Satanist in Asheville had warned me, who had worked in that hospital, this hospital was filled with both Satanists and witches as doctors, nurses, and other employees. Schufert claimed, in fact, the Satanists and the witches were in constant invisible battles with one another there, hurling summoned demons and curses at one another, etc. They would not touch my friend at first. Therefore, when warned that it was a Satanist attack connected, finally she was stabilized and was able to come home. The harassment continued with threatening phone calls for weeks as Cindy recovered at home. Frustrated, Schufert grabbed the phone one day and blasted them. "Listen, you Satanists are nothing but a bunch of wimps and cowards like your father Satan," she told the Satanist on the phone. "Think I'm impressed when it takes 10 of you men or more to sacrifice just one little helpless baby? Cowards, get a life. Instead of taking a life, get Jesus Christ in your lives instead." Because their evil, this ridicule only made things worse. This infuriated the leader, code name of King One, Schufert wrote. King One, apparently one of the most powerful Satanists in America at that time, responded by calling back later. "Tell Pam she has 40 hours to leave your trailer, or else," he told Cindy. Schufert told Cindy to tell King One, "Sorry, I don't take orders from Satanists, only Jesus Christ." When Schufert refused to leave, the Satanists descended and terrorized them throughout the night by hiding in the woods and making scraping sounds on the outside of Cindy's mobile home. I paced from one end of the trailer to the other, Bible held high, and standing on the Word of God for her divine protection. Schufert wrote, "They made it through the night, but it wasn't the end. One night the harassment went into the extreme, however. Cindy had by this time moved her mattress into the living room floor so that she would not be window level when she slept at night. Her head was ground level right next to an air duct. One night she came to me and said, 'I've been smelling something strange for the last 15 minutes. I had smelled nothing. A few minutes later she said, 'What are those funny black spots doing around your head?' She then collapsed and fell on her knees, her head and shoulders fallen on the sofa. I ran and lifted her entire body up on the sofa. She was totally unconscious by now. We later figured out they had introduced some type of chemical weapon into her ventilation system, but not strong enough to affect everyone in the trailer. Only her, since her face had been directly next to the vent. She and I heard sounds coming from underneath her trailer that night, and we knew that they had spent some time under there, but we dared not go out to confront them at night. When she came out of the state many hours later, she admitted to having a most marvelous angelic visitation in which she believed God had visited her and promised her victory in this battle. Eventually, Cindy's family left Asheville to escape the harassment. She and her mother were forced to relocate far out of the area to avoid further attack, Schufert wrote. But these murderers never succeeded in getting her after all. Nor did they succeed in getting me, although they made numerous attempts on my life after that, through abduction attempts, poisoning, even sending into my life a Satanist posing as a Christian who needed counseling. Many of Schufert's details are vague, such as the location of the caverns where Satan is summoned upon a golden throne to witness human sacrifice, but she does mention one location by name, SEELY Castle. Schufert recounts the story, she says, a high school student related to her about human sacrifice, which supposedly took place in an imposing mansion outside Asheville known as SEELY'S Castle. He admitted that the baby sacrifice took place in SEELY'S Castle, long reputed to be a location for the satanic ritual of the rich elite and powerful Satanists that populate Asheville and the surrounding region, Schufert wrote. This grim gray castle can only be glimpsed through the woods as one drives towards the city of Asheville from the Interstate 40 exit, or if one has the courage to drive up Town Mountain Road, where many of the Satanist elite have large mansions, and to park in front of its somber metal gates with surveillance cameras. As other former Satanists have admitted, many a human sacrifice ritual has taken place within its gray stone walls. SEELY'S Castle certainly does look like the ominous headquarters of a Lovecraftian cult. The tall, ivy-covered brick facade feels more like dungeon than a home. Frederick Loring Seely, a chemist, newspaper editor, and businessman, is credited, along with his father-in-law Edwin Wiley Grove, with transforming Asheville into the most popular resort city in the Southeast in the early 20th century. Grove, a patent medicine tycoon, whose company produced well-known products like Grove's tasteless chill tonic and laxative bromoquinine tablets, gifted 10 acres on the top of Sunset Mountain, a promontory called Overlook Park, to Fred and his daughter Evelyn Grove Seely to build their new home. Fred designed it himself, and work began in 1914 using native granite rock from the surrounding mountains. The 20,000 square foot Overlook Castle, as Seely called it, was completed 10 years later. Besides the medieval-style parapets, the Jacobean ceilings, and the lattice windows, Seely included a number of subtle but fascinating features. The door of the courtyard entrance is made of beams from the 14th century ancestral Seely home in Ireland. The curved oak door to Seely's office, now gone, had 10 hand-carved panels depicting scenes from the Bible. A Tudor mantel in the library came from an English manor once owned by Queen Victoria. In the great room with 32-foot-high ceilings and massive beams made from whole trees, a stone from the Tower of London and a piece of the Blarney Stone were set into the fireplace. In the bedrooms, the closet doors were wired by Thomas Edison with switches that automatically turned the lights on when the doors were opened. The lions on each side of the tunnel entrance are said to have been from the courthouse in Atlanta that Sherman's army burned down during the Civil War. Seely's creation was both impressive and foreboding. Described in its 1980 nomination to the National Register of Historic Places, the castle is described as one of Asheville's most pretentious private residences. Asheville tradition maintains that the building is a reproduction of Ford Abbey, Dorset, near London, a mid-12th century monastery with the abbot's lodging dating from the 16th century. The nomination submission reads, "The central tower of the abbot's lodging provides the best comparison, if any, to Overlook. Both structures are of stone construction in the English Gothic style and are accented by parapets, lattice windows, and stone trim." Seely intended the top of the tower on the south side of the castle to be an observatory. Due to the depressed economy, however, he altered his plan and roughed the tower walls off in keeping with the ruin effect of ancient English manor houses. The Overlook served as a summer home for the Seelys, who spent much of their time in the Far East buying quinine, the primary ingredient in Grove's tasteless chill tonic. The popular medicine claimed to cure colds and prevent malaria. When they were staying at the castle, the Seelys were said to have some impressive guests, including Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone. Thomas Edison would camp on the castle grounds while visiting Asheville. Seeley attended Princeton as a grown man, studying architecture. During this period, he became friendly with Woodrow Wilson, who was then the university's president. Asheville native Jerry Sternberg wrote, Seeley later became a significant fundraiser for Wilson's presidential campaigns. During his second term in office, Wilson suffered a stroke, and legend has it that the government was secretly being run by his wife and Colonel Edward House, the president's longtime advisor. Every day, to fool the public, they would pretend to wheel Wilson out onto the porch at the White House to enjoy the afternoon sun. But this was just a stand-in. Supposedly, Wilson was actually being kept out of sight in the castle's master bedroom. It is also said that papers related to the Teapot Dome scandal, having to do with oil leases during the Harding administration, were locked in the enormous safe in the counting house in the castle's west wing. Sternberg noted, it is not known what connection, if any, Seeley had with all that. Fred and Evelyn lived in the Overlook until Fred's death in 1942. Evelyn sold it to the Asheville Biltmore College in 1949, and the school occupied the property until they eventually outgrew it in 1961. Two owners of the Holiday Inn hotel chain bought the castle and 29 acres of land, but they had no use for the castle and put it back on the market. Sadly, it has deteriorated considerably due to lack of maintenance, water damage, and vandalism, Sternberg said. Some former students have been holding some pretty interesting parties up there. The castle was in rough shape, and several offers had fallen through. Sternberg, who owned a junk business in Asheville, eventually bought Overlook for $40,000. If it came down to it, he figured he could at least make some money salvaging the leaded windows, chandeliers, antique doors, and other architectural materials. He moved his family in, got a former police dog to serve as a security, and began making much-needed repairs. His family enjoyed their life in the castle, where the great room had more square footage than the entire house they left behind. The kids' bedroom with the large blackboards left over from the college and the library became a playroom where they could make as much noise as they wanted, since, as Sternberg says, the living quarters were 1/10 of a mile away. My most vivid memory is getting up at 4 a.m. on July 20th, 1969, sitting with my family in my castle and continually nodding off as we watched Neil Armstrong land on the moon, Sternberg recalls. One of the most common questions Sternberg has been asked was if the Overlook was haunted. If you sat in the great room on a dark night, you would occasionally see an eerie, sylph-like figure wisp through the room. Never pausing and never threatening, he wrote. The kids gleefully called it Chippy and squealed with delight in its presence. Unfortunately, there were no bizarre happenings that anyone knew of that might have spawned this supernatural being, and while I hated to dispel romance and adventure, I always figured it was a reflection of some kind of light from Tunnel Road. Or was it? Another odd aspect of the castle is what Sternberg called the secret room in the library. In the far corner sat an antique fireplace that had once belonged to Queen Victoria, he writes. Set at an angle, it guarded the famous secret room. Visitors were mesmerized by the fact that although you could see two windows from the outside, the area was inaccessible from within. People would stand in front of the fireplace for hours, searching for a knob or button that would cause it to open like in the old B-movies, revealing a hidden treasure trove. I never shared their conviction, but it certainly contributed to the castle's mystique. Sternberg's children grew up and moved out, and Sternberg lived there alone for several years before he decided to sell it. Finding a buyer this time proved to be as difficult as when he bought it years earlier. Unfortunately, in those days, there were not a lot of buyers for Mansion in the Sky, he wrote. We had plenty of tire kickers and hood raisers who really just wanted a cook's tour, but no offers. He then sought out a nonprofit organization he could donate the Overlook to for use as a community center or museum, and eventually a Bible school took up his offer. Everybody dreams of being king for a day, but I became a king for several years, Sternberg wrote of his life in the castle. Not really, though. I did get to live in a real castle, which was certainly a very special life experience. Overlook Christian Ministries assumed stewardship of the castle in the late 1970s. There were full gospel ministry that believed in speaking in tongues and the gift of the Pentecost, which some claim may be the root of the rumors of Satanism. They wrote a book about their ministry called A Castle in the Kingdom. The castle was acquired by the Wells family in 1984, who seemed to be the last known owners, though another rumor claims executive of Bonworth purchased the castle from the Overlook Ministry for use as a company retreat. It is unclear exactly when Schufert says satanic rituals and human sacrifices were taking place in SEELY'S castle, but it sounds as though these claims date back to the 1990s. Online records don't seem to provide any information on its ownership at that time, so it's difficult to pinpoint exactly who may have been hosting these infernal gatherings. There you go. Interesting, huh? I wonder if it's still open. Wow. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Getting back to stranger than fiction stories. Let's go to this other story titled On the Trail of the Headhunters. In the early 1900s, shrunken heads known as Santas were acquired at U.S. museums. Despite being macabre, they fascinated the public. During the early 20th century, travel logs of life in the darkest jungles of the Amazon were written by Lewis Cotlow and Robert Ripley of Ripley's Believe It or Not fame. In 1940, Gustav Struve, a native of Ecuador of German descent, made the rounds of the speaking circuit with a presentation titled My 4 Years with the Headhunters of the Amazon. His story placed him as the only survivor of an ill-fated botanical expedition. It seems he was spared and married a chief's daughter. During his years among the headhunting tribe, he learned the secret process of shrinking human heads and even entire bodies. He finally made an escape with their child. Prior to this, he had attended university in Guayaquil and went on to marry an Ecuadorian woman. They had a son. During the early 1920s, he traveled throughout South and Central America conducting business. This lifestyle brought about a permanent separation from his wife. Excuse me. He immigrated to Chicago in 1925 and worked for the Argentine consulate. He married his second wife, Gertrude, in 1939. Research into Struve's expedition, where he was supposedly taken prisoner by Amazonian natives, could not be substantiated, and his references were vague. Supposedly, it was a botanical journey initiated in 1914. However, among Struve's papers, there was newspaper clipping of a talk given by Herbert Huth, a German engineer, who detailed the exact experiences Struve described. Huth claimed he was taken captive by cannibals near the headwaters of the Amazon during the 1920s. He also learned the secrets of shrinking heads and bodies. It's believed Struve used the story as the inspiration for his lectures during a time when adventure stories thrived. Fritz W. Updegraff wrote a book in 1923 where he wrote of a man in Panama who, quote, made a business of preparing and shrinking heads and who had even shrunken two entire bodies, one of an adult, the other evidently a child, end quote. Struve, by his own admission, lived in Panama during 1923. Was he shrinking human heads there as well? Besides speaking about his adventures, Struve sold Jivaro shrunken head trophies. He sold one in 1933 to the Adventurers Club for $52. One of the shrunken men was sold to New York City's Museum of the American Indian, MAI, which came with a price tag of $500, which in 1923 was a significant amount of money. Due to the demand for shrunken heads, producing counterfeit ones became a cottage industry. They were not produced by the Jivaro tribes, but mostly by individuals who used the bodies of unclaimed paupers to fill the demands from the tourists. M.W. Sterling, an ethnographer, wrote in 1938 that he believed the counterfeit shrunken heads were being produced as far back as 1872 in different places in Panama, Colombia, and Ecuador by a white man living on the border of the Jivaro country. He had learned the process from the natives between the late 1800s to the early 1900s. Fake Sansas were differentiated by having facial hair, since the Jivaro would singe any hair off. Vine was used to close the lips versus string, and they didn't have holes in the skull, which would enable a warrior to hang it around his neck during ceremonies. The ASHEVILLE tribe believed that killing a man created an avenging soul that would leave the corpse via the mouth and come after the perpetrator, which is the reason the lips were sewn shut. True ceremonial santas would have charcoal rubbed over to prevent the spirit from seeing out. In the 2002 book Shrunk Heads, Santas, Trophies, and Human Exotica, it was found that only 23 of 125 museum and privately collected heads are authentic. Whether the curator knew at the time of the sale is unknown. The motivation to buy it anyway was there, since the shrunken heads were sure to draw audiences when they were displayed. In 1926, Carl Lester Little, an American journalist and collector, described seeing a shrunken head the first time being displayed in a window at a big New York store. It was about the size of an orange, black and shiny, with strongly marked little features and long, coarse black hair. A placard underneath it explained it was produced by the Shuara Indians in Ecuador. He decided to travel to South America to discover how they were produced. He was in Argentina, and the day before he was set to leave into the jungles, a veteran American traveler, who was an old friend, told him he was a fool. He said, quote, "Do you realize that you will be the first white man most of those Indians have ever laid eyes on? One of the few whites that have ever been donkey enough to risk it? Brown heads with long black hair are familiar to those devils, but think what they do to get hold of a white head. You'll be a curiosity for once in your life. If you go in, some Indian will come to me a year or so from now to get $1,000 out of me for a rare white head. Nothing like it has been seen before, and my friend, that head will be your head. Don't go into the Oriente of Ecuador. It's sheer craziness." End quote. Despite the advice, he left what was called the land of the headhunters, land of the phantom hunters, and land of women manhunters. This area was included part of Ecuador and part of Peru. He traveled 2 weeks, reaching the Andean heights until arriving in the jungle where the Shuar live. The first village they reached was the Arepicos, which was made up of 15 or 20 huts with thatched roofs. Based on information he garnered along the way, he decided to pose as a white capitu, or witch doctor. He also grew his beard out. He knew he had to be careful not to incur any revenge from the natives, where revenge was a cult. He spent 3 days there, and was warned not to cross an invisible line that divided where the men slept and where the harem slept. The guide told him his last client ended up getting his head chopped off, since the natives were very jealous. Before he left, the chief took him to a room where he kept 11 heads. The mouths were sewn with red cord in order to keep the spirits submissive. The Shuara native explained that he had acquired the trophies by wiping out the males of an entire family who were blood-fueled enemies. The man laid a finger on one of the heads and with gleaming eyes explained, "This one was once on the shoulder of a mighty man who had the wickedness to steal one of my wives. He and his brothers and his sons, we made their heads small." He traveled further into the interior, staying with different Shuara villagers. One day, he spent the night with his guides in the hut of a half-breed trader. Early one morning, as they were about to leave, he saw one of the guides dipping the tip of his lance into a gourd of poison that always hung over his shoulder. For a moment, he was not sure who the guide meant to kill. Suddenly, the man plunged his lance into the half-breed's chest and then vanished into the jungle. He reached for his rifle when his main guide, Huanga, held him back. He said, "Put down the rifle. It is a custom with the headhunters that they enjoy killing someone at the break of day. It brings good luck for the rest of the trip." The murderous guide eventually rejoined the party. Unexpectedly, they stumbled on a war party made up of 80 warriors. They were excited and dancing. On a banana leaf lay a collection of severed enemy heads. He saw where each head received a vertical blow at the back with a machete. He didn't describe the rest of what he called gruesome details, only saying the santas were fitted over a wood ball about the size of an orange. During the ritual, the men yelled and the wives sang, which was to render harmless the spirit of the enemy. When the head was dry, it was rubbed with a liquid to make the skin hard. The wooden ball was removed from the slit in the back of the head, which was then sewn up. The victory feast would last from 6 months to a year, and even 2 years. Guests would come by the hundreds and spend a week. He ran into a problem when he tried to take a lock of hair from one of the women. A witch doctor warned that witchcraft on a woman, where she was prayed to death, could be done if her hair was taken. Much of the ceremony was done to make sure the victim did not inflict revenge on the slayer. He spent a year traveling through headhunter territory. He went on to describe that secret traffic existed for the heads, where tourists in Ecuador had paid as high as $500 for one of them. Ecuador passed a law which made it a crime to sell or buy the shrunken heads, and tourists could not take them through customs. However, a bootlegging operation sprung up to meet the demand. In 1928, Don Mario Ramirez de Velasco of Buenos Aires brought a collection of historic Spanish and Inca antique art to Los Angeles. Among the pieces of intrinsic value because of their rarity might also be mentioned a collection of shrunken and mummified heads, an art known only to 3 tribes of Ecuador Indians, the Sansas, the Jibaros, and the Macabeos. In the mid-1940s, the Jibaro tribes learned that shrunken heads could be traded for a shotgun. Shuar warriors would take the heads of whole families belonging to the Achuar tribes. They did this for 2 reasons. One was the commerce aspect. The other was since the Achuar were reduced to using spears, they were easier to capture. They would refer to the Achuar as fish, as in, let's go catch some fish. By 1998, the Achuar had the world's second highest murder rate. According to anthropologist John Patton, who studied intertribal murder and revenge in the Canambo River Valley, observed Achuar men would not so much as go out for a piss without bringing a rifle. In 2016, a museum did a DNA analysis of a shrunken head they had. The curators were told it belonged to a male shaman who had failed to cure a child and was killed by the father. The analysis revealed the head belonged to a woman. This disputed the Shuar society reasoning for taking a head, which was to stop the soul of the warrior from taking revenge. Shuar women were never warriors. The reason why she was used is unknown, but most probably it was for commercial purposes. It's not even known if she was a native. She could have been just a body that ended up unclaimed in the morgue. There you go. That guy about, let me go spend some time with headhunters. I'd pass on that. And our last story is out of the New York Post, and it's titled, Crying Virgin Mary Statue with Tears Flowing Down Her Cheeks Stuns Churchgoers. Was this a true miracle or just a religious sob story? Churchgoers in Mexico claim to have witnessed a miracle after spotting a statue of the Virgin Mary that appeared to have real tears rolling down her cheeks. Accompanying footage shows the statue named the Virgin of Dolores encased in glass with water droplets seemingly emerging from the statue's eyes and running down her face. Many reportedly drew throngs of skeptics and believers alike, with many pilgrims claiming that it was a sign from God. So a couple of tears started flowing, cried witness Victor Ramos told CEN of the alleged phenomenon, which occurred at a church in the town of El Chanal, located in the state of Colima and north of the capital city with the same name. Similarly, when we cry and our eyes become red, the same thing happens to the image, Ramos further insisted of the alleged divine sob session. Many locals believe the misty-eyed Mary was weeping for the violence plaguing Colima, whose capital was ranked the most violent city in the world in 2022. As of October, the Colima Prosecutor's Office recorded 702 confirmed international homicides in the state, many of which stem from the fact that the city is a hotbed of drug cartel activity. We can associate with the violence rates that are being experienced here in the state of Colima, also here in the community, Ramos claimed. According to a report by the U.S. Congress, the region is contested by at least 4 major cartels: Cartel de Jalisco Nuevo Generación, CJNG, Sinaloa, Santa Rosa de Lima, and Carteles Unidos, and authorities are powerless to stop the violence. As such, residents are praying to the crying idol to stop the violence. May she give us peace in Colima and throughout the world, that we may return to the Colima of before, said visitor Maria Mercedes Hernandez. Some skeptics, though, had a more scientific explanation for the weeping, with Italian chemistry professor and Shroud of Turin naysayer Luigi Gallascelli attributing the statue's ability to absorb moisture due to its porousness. You need a hollow statue made of plaster or ceramic, which must be covered on the outside with a waterproof layer, he explained. By filling the statue with water through an imperceptible hole at the top, the porous material will absorb it, but the outer layers will prevent it from coming out. However, if the protective glaze were to get scratched near Mary's eyes, the absorbed water would leak out, giving the illusion that the statue was crying, according to the professor. This isn't the first time a replica of Jesus' mother has been seen allegedly shedding a tear. In 2019, worshippers flocked to the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in Chicago to witness a weeping painting of the Virgin Mary that they believe was mourning the institution's pending foreclosure. Meanwhile, the Catholic Diocese in the New Mexico city of Las Cruces launched an investigation into a crying sculpture of the Messiah's mother in a Hobbs church located there. A chemical analysis of the liquid revealed that it was, somewhat suspiciously, fragrant olive oil of the type used for baptisms and other holy purposes. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the stories for today. All weird and unnatural and a little bit shivery. And I'll be back soon with some more stuff. Until next time.